Chapter 3. Weighing the half-pounds of flour, excluding the scoop, and depositing them dust-free into the thin paper sacks held a simple kind of adventure for me. I developed an eye for measuring how full a silver-looking ladle of flour, mash, meal, sugar, or corn had to be to push the scale indicator over to 8 ounces or 1 pound. When I was absolutely accurate, our appreciative customers used to admire, "Sister Henderson sure got some smart grandchildrens." If I was off in the store's favor, the eagle-eyed women would say, "Put some more in that sack, child. Don't you try to make your profit off of me." Then I would quietly but persistently punish myself for every bad judgment. The fine was no silver-wrapped kisses, the sweet chocolate drops that I loved more than anything in the world, except Bailey, and maybe canned pineapples. My obsession with pineapples nearly drove me mad. I dreamt of the days when I would be grown and able to buy a whole carton for myself alone. Although the syrupy golden rings sat in their exotic cans on our shelves year-round, we only tasted them during Christmas. Mama used the juice to make almost black fruit cakes. Then she lined the heavy sooted encrusted iron skillets with the pineapple rings for rich upside-down cakes. Bailey and I received 1 slice each, and I carried mine around for hours, shredding off the fruit until nothing was left except the perfume on my fingers. I'd like to think that my desire for pineapples was so sacred that I wouldn't allow myself to steal a can, which was possible, and eat it alone out in the garden. But I'm certain that I must have weighed the possibility of the scent exposing me and didn't have the nerve to attempt it. Until I was 13 and left Arkansas for good, the store was my favorite place to be. Alone and empty in the mornings, it looked like an unopened present from a stranger. Opening the front doors was pulling the ribbon off the unexpected gift. The light would come in softly. We faced north, easing itself off the shelves of mackerel, salmon, tobacco, thread. It fell flat on the big vat of lard, and by noontime during the summer, the grease had softened to a thick soup. Whenever I walked into the store in the afternoon, I sensed that it was tired. I alone could hear the slow pulse of its job half done. But just before bedtime, after numerous people had walked in and out, had argued over their bills or joked about their neighbors, or just dropped in to give Sister Henderson a "Hi, y'all," the promise of magic mornings returned to the store and spread itself over the family in washed life waves. Mama opened boxes of crispy crackers and we sat around the meat block at the rear of the store. I sliced onions and Bailey opened 2 or even 3 cans of sardines and allowed their juice of oil and fishing boats to ooze down and around the sides. That was supper. In the evening, when we were alone like that, Uncle Willie didn't stutter or shake or give any indication that he had an affliction. It seemed that the peace of a day's ending was an assurance that the covenant God made with children, Negroes and the crippled, was still in effect. Throwing scoops of corn on the chickens and mixing sour dry mash with leftover food and oily dishwater for the hogs were among our evening chores. Bailey and I sloshed down twilight trails to the pig pens, and standing on the first fence rungs, we poured down the unappealing concoctions to our grateful hogs. They mashed their tender pink snouts down into the slop and rooted and grunted their satisfaction. We always grunted a reply only half in jest. We were also grateful that we had concluded the dirtiest of chores and had only gotten the evil-smelling swill on our shoes, stockings, feet, and hands. Late one day, as we were attending to the pigs, I heard a horse in the front yard. It really should have been called a driveway, except that there was nothing to drive into it, and ran to find out who had come riding up on a Thursday evening when even Mr. Stewart, the quiet, bitter man who owned a riding horse, would be resting by his warm fire until the morning called him out to turn over his field. The used-to-be sheriff sat rakishly astraddle his horse. His nonchalance was meant to convey his authority and power over even dumb animals. How much more capable he would be with Negroes, it went without saying. His twang jogged into the brittle air. From the side of the store, Bailey and I heard him say to Mama, "Annie, tell Willie he better lay low tonight. A crazy and messed with a white lady today. Some of the boys will be coming over here later." Even after the slow drag of years, I remember the sense of fear which filled my mouth with hot, dry air and made my body light. The boys? Those cement faces and eyes of hate that burn the clothes off you if they happen to see you lounging on the main street downtown on Saturday. Boys? It seemed that youth had never happened to them. Boys. No, rather men who were covered with grave's dust and age, without beauty or learning, the ugliness and rottenness of old abominations. If on Judgment Day I were summoned by St. Peter to give testimony to the used-to-be sheriff's act of kindness, I would be unable to say anything in his behalf. His confidence that my uncle and every other black man who heard of the Klan's coming ride would scurry under their houses to hide in chicken droppings was too humiliating to hear. Without waiting for Mama's thanks, he rode out of the yard, sure that things were as they should be, and that he was a gentle squire, saving those deserving serfs from the laws of the land which he condoned. Immediately, while his horse's hoofs were still loudly thudding the ground, Mama blew out the coal oil lamps. She had a quiet, hard talk with Uncle Willie and called Bailey and me into the store. We were told to take the potatoes and onions out of their bins and knock out the dividing walls that kept them apart. Then, with a tedious and fearful slowness, Uncle Willie gave me his rubber-tipped cane and bent down to get into the now enlarged empty bin. It took forever before he lay down flat, and then we covered him with potatoes and onions, layer upon layer like a casserole. Grandmother knelt praying in the darkened store. It was fortunate that the boys didn't ride into our yard that evening and insist that Mama open the store. They would have surely found Uncle Willie and just as surely lynched him. He moaned the whole night through as if he had in fact been guilty of some heinous crime. The heavy sounds pushed their way up out of the blanket of vegetables, and I pictured his mouth pulling down on the right side and his saliva flowing into the eyes of new potatoes and waiting there like dewdrops for the warmth of morning.